What's up, everybody? Brothers, sisters, psychonauts, and seekers of truth. It is Ananka, and welcome to my bazaar. Today, I have an Amanita Muscaria trip report for you. The title of this trip report is A Horrific Meeting with Myself, and was submitted to Erowid in 2017 by the user Embika H. With all that being said, let our story begin. The following events took place in the late summer of 2004 in the town of Sofia, Bulgaria. My friends S and P had gathered some fly agarics in the wood outside of town. We had graduated high school 4 years before that, and were still enthusiastic and naive in our dealings with drugs. Neither of us three had ever taken anything more potent than a hash cookie. Anyway, P would join us later, but me and S had met in a small public garden and ingested a raw mushroom each. I was a student in anthropology, and S in psychology. We ate the mushrooms with honey. What to do now? It was the afternoon. Let's take a trolley to the center of town and walk about stoned. Great idea. As I said, neither of us had any experience with the stronger substances, and our only point of reference was marijuana and hashish. We thought it would be the same, but more intense. How wrong we were. As our trolley reached a park near the center, we got off and went to lie on the grass. S felt uncomfortable processes in his stomach, while I was quite euphoric. An airliner flew above us. Kablow! And after 5 to 10 minutes, S felt fine, and we continued on foot on our quest to walk about town. By this point, I was beginning to take down my experiences on a small notepad. Of my notes, the first 2 pages were decipherable, but after that, just squiggles. To return to the park. By this time, I was feeling that my skin is alive. In the sense that as I walked, my clothes touched and rubbed thousands of points upon my skin, and this is no longer below my threshold of consciousness, but to the contrary, I enthusiastically felt it and wrote it down. Also, my attempt to get some musical orgasm failed completely. Although I stuffed earphones into my ears and played Master of Puppets at full volume, I still could hear everything else going on around me, including mine and S's footsteps. My senses are greatly magnified, I thought. How great! Minutes later, a snow-like interference appeared in my visual field, very similar to the snow on TV. Half an hour later, something in me gave. I told S. My ego just collapsed. You lead, I will follow. And from then on, he was the guide of where to go and what to do. He was not so smashed as I was, while I was an automaton, following him. In brief, here are the stages of what happened to me. Stage 1. Initial euphoria. Amplification of senses. Number 2. Snow. Interference in the visual field. 3. Loss of ego. 4. Loss of coordination. Later, S told me that I tried to play some music and stuffed in one ear an earphone and into the other a cigarette. Number 5, catatonic inner battle. For a considerable time, I could not move or speak, but sat immobile, while within me raged a battle between what I perceived to be myself and my ego. Short representation of the inner struggle. Ego. So, you want to be rid of me? We'll see about that. Since you were born, I've organized your world, made you sane, adequate. And what do I get in return? Ungrateful swine. Me. Arg. Whimper. Ego. I can do anything I want with you. I can make you open and close your eyes. I can make you speak or shut up. I can make you move or keep you immobile. I can make you fall unconscious, and I can make you wake up. Me. Bazonk. Tinkle. Blap. During this time, everything I thought in language became immediately the territory of the internal enemy. Thus, if I wanted to keep myself separate from the internal enemy, I had to think without words. Quite a difficult thing. Later, S told me that I just sat immobile, with muscles twitching on my face and arms. But inside me, a complicated compromise was being made out. If I could prove that I was not an utterly worthless piece of crap, I could keep a deal of freedom from the internal controller. But how to prove my value? In the end, I moved a little, in order to write with an unsteady hand something which S and P, who had just arrived on the scene, should do. If they take the trouble to figure out what I was doing and actually did what I asked them, it was something small, like saying a word. This would prove that I have enough value to them, and thus I was not an utterly insignificant piece of crud. And they did figure it out, and they did do it, and the compromise worked out. I could again move and even speak. 6. Thin lifeline to the body. After I became capable of movement and speech, P gave me some pot. It helped because it brought a feeling of familiarity to the whole situation. Nevertheless, I was still spaced out. 95% of my being was somewhere out there, floating in a vast, fragmented cosmos, and I was connected to my body with a thin lifeline. I could control it to walk and to talk, but as if from the outside. 7. The return. As we sat in yet another park, by this time it was evening, I gathered my willpower and decided to finally return to my senses, to my body, to my reality. And I did. I felt my essence rushing back into my limited little body/reality. It was an unpleasant feeling, as if suddenly I'd have put on eyeglasses not intended for me, as if suddenly the senses were muffled, and I watched life through a thick glass. The second I returned, I stood up and begun vomiting. This I did at intervals for the next hour or two, sometimes on all fours, to the delight of all romantic couples and old ladies in the park. 8. The aftermath. It took me about a day to come back to a socially adequate manner, but upon my return, my intellectual scalpel began mercilessly dissecting anything in view. After returning home, and crapping and puking for a while, I tried to calm myself by rereading Ringworld. I couldn't. Instead of relaxing and floating together with the plot, my mind kept analyzing Niven's style, plot structure, and real Earth races, used, as it seemed to me, as models for his aliens. I think the puppeteer seemed Japanese to me, or perhaps Chinese. Cartoon Network also did not help. I saw not cartoons with characters and plots, but simply animated movements. Completely uninspiring. I could feel the real people who had made them, and the girls, sex appeal disappeared completely. Girls, as well as everyone else, were just lumpy, twisted, rotten, sick descendant of apes, clothed in ridiculous combinations of materials and colors. In a broader sense, I never came back, as in believing again completely in the everyday reality. In a narrower sense, I was fully returned only weeks later. I know now that we did this completely unprepared, without respect, without realistic expectations, and that it could have turned into a complete disaster for everyone involved. But in spite of its nightmarish content and intensity, the trip was one of the most important events in my life, and I am grateful that it happened. It changed my perspective, expanded my world, and taught me much. When on the next day, P asked me how I would sum up the experience, I replied, a horrific meeting with myself. Ambika Hapara. P.S. Somewhere around the middle of the trip, I suddenly realized that death is real. I felt as afraid as I had ever been before. I pondered. There must be some way, a compromise, to not go insane from this knowledge that death is real. In the end, I had a quick vision. Something like two orbs approaching each other, accompanied by a flood of relief. I had realized why death should not be feared. To this day, I try sometimes to recall what exactly I had realized, but I can't.